very excited. It's an honor to speak to you. And thanks to Professor Tate for inviting me here. I'm just coming off of a sabbatical, so for those of you who don't know, like every once in a while they allow us professors to go off in our little caves and like do whatever we want for a semester or two. So I'm just coming off that, and this is one of the projects I've worked on during that time. And I'll apologize ahead of time if my enthusiasm brims over, because I haven't been in front of students in a while. I'm actually very hungry to be in front of students, so it's really nice to see so many students here. How many of you are biology majors? And this is by no means a litmus test for appreciating what we're going to talk about today, but how many of you are biology majors? None? Okay, cool. What other majors do you represent? I'm just curious. We're going to shout it out. Just,
health promotion.
What's that?
Health promotion.
Health
promotion.
Health promotion, cool.
Childhood education.
Childhood education.
Psychology.
Criminal justice psychology, awesome. Cool, so we have a huge variety here. So there are biology majors here, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, they just, they're probably so anatomical and organismal that they don't think about these higher level things. I'm glad that you all are interested in that. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Professor Tate gave you a good sense of what I do. But I guess I think of myself as a scientist among creatives. I am in a department that has other full-time science professors and math professors, but we're a small little group amongst this very large campus of art and design students, just down a block from you here, about 15 minutes by bike, called Pratt Institute. And so I teach a big variety of courses. One of the neat things about teaching non-majors, I only teach non-majors, is that I just get to teach this big variety of stuff and teach it from the perspective of kind of the connection to society, broader science literacy. So I have a lot of fun in my job. And also, this should make some sense to you as to why we're going to talk about what we're talking about today and my connection to it. If you think about it, what do like architects and artists and designers, what are these people doing? I mean, whether they realize it consciously or not, they're trying to propagate cultural ideas. They spread ideas around with the work they do. And many of them endeavor to create new ideas. So their idea, they may not do this consciously, and we'll learn throughout the talk. It doesn't really matter whether or not you do this consciously. Many of my students are kind of culture creators and culture propagators. And so this is part of the reason I'm interested in cultural evolution. I'm going to warn you right ahead of time that there is this potential to offend. Now, these are interesting times. I don't know how much you keep up with this in the news, but I'm sure Provost, you keep up with this kind of stuff. There is on campus, there is this ongoing debate about how much we're going to tolerate different kinds of ideas, and people have taken offense to things people said. I'm going to try not to do that, and I'm very aware of the distinction between what we can know and what is through science, and what we may decide, each separately or collectively, what we think ought to be through our values. And I'm going to be very careful to try to keep my science, my values separated here, and you're going to call me out if there's any kind of problem to that. But the topics I'm going to talk about can be controversial. This one's been a big one in the news. That's not so much a big deal for you all at your age, so most of you are conventional college age, but this is a big deal, particularly among people who get into their 30s, maybe haven't had children, maybe not by choice, maybe by choice. And this has been a big debate in our society in recent time. What it means, this choice to have children, is it significant? And it goes from people saying that people who don't have children are being selfish, to people who don't have children feeling very ostracized. So this is kind of an interesting thing that we're going to talk about. The genetic evolution of human beings, right? We love to talk about the genetic evolution of other organisms, but famously Charles Darwin published a book about evolution in 1859 and waited, let me do my math on the fly, 12 more years later before he published his book on the evolution as it related to humans. In the Origin of Species, he very carefully avoids humans because we are sensitive about what our genetic evolution means for ourselves. So I'll be talking about that, and I'll be talking about the cultural evolution of humans. And culture is also a very sensitive issue. So by all means, I'm a New Yorker, a native New Yorker. I'm actually a native Long Islander, so it's not a real New Yorker. But I have a very thick skin, so I'm going to ask you to discuss things, and anything I say that you think is off or disagree with, please, let's discuss it. What I want to talk about, though, before we offend you, is I want to actually talk about one of my favorite athletes. All right, so his name is Dean Pye. It's like a promotional video for one of the videos about him. He's a rock climber, so rock climbers do lots of fun things like sit in the cold in a rock with their feet hurting, all taped up and brutalized from doing this terribly painful thing called rock climbing. Here he is climbing without any ropes on a precipice way up on the sky. There he is, going across a line there with no safety tether. All right, so you'll notice that if he falls, unless he catches that tether, he's a dead man. All right, beautiful though, isn't it? Pretty gorgeous, right? And here's the last thing. Why not add a little jumping off some cliffs right there? There we go. All right, jump off the cliff. Oh, jump off the cliff while you're climbing with a parachute on. You don't get to see the parachute open. There's a parachute involved in all these flights. The most famous flight here is from the Eiger in Switzerland. Here he is jumping off the Eiger. He flew almost 3 full minutes. Glided. I shouldn't say flew, right? The flying animals would say that's not flying, it's gliding. But he glided for about 3 minutes before touching down. So there he is, Dean Potter. So just a review. Free solo climbing. This means climbing without ropes. You can't get the, I don't have a big enough screen to fully get you the sense of this, but the Yosemite Valley is thousands of feet below. All right? I love the looks on your faces. Some of you have this like, what the heck is this guy doing kind of thing. Again, highlining this is called, where you walk on what's called slack line. This is a lot of fun, by the way. I fully encourage you to do it 2 feet off the ground, where like an ankle injury is like the most that you can pretty much expect to have happen. It's a lot of fun. It's really good for your balance. I don't know if you can do this one safely. Much safer from a plane, though. People do use wingsuits during conventional parachuting. In there, you have plenty of time to react, and if something goes wrong. Here, we're talking about jumping off a cliff, and in a few seconds, needing to get into the position to fly, and then release your parachute, is what I'm trying to say. See, if I was doing it, I'd be dead, right? Because I can't even get the word parachute out, much less pull ripcord in time. So these are pretty risky behaviors. And I sort of wish that I could sit here and just talk about how cool this is, and how interesting this is, and how like a new form of culture this is creating, without some form kind of sadness to it. But unfortunately, Dean Potter did not make it. All right, he died more. And this wouldn't surprise you. I have a lot of friends who are really into this sports, these kind of extreme sports, and a lot of people admit that every once in a while they go into Google and would Google Dean Potter dead, because they wanted to find out like how long did it take this guy to kill himself doing all this crazy stuff. And I don't want to make light of his life or anything like that. And in fact, you'll see I'm going to point out some really interesting things about his life. They're very successful. But not surprisingly, probably to you watching what he did, eventually an accident killed him. What's surprising about what this guy did? I'm going to give you a little taste, and now you can go to YouTube later and see all kinds of crazy stuff. Anything surprising to you? It probably feels amazing, right? Especially when you're at the other end, you've made it, right? Especially after you've posted something to the web and millions of people have seen it, right? There must be some parts that feel really good about doing this, right? So why is he crazy if it feels good? It probably wouldn't feel good for most of us. He was, to his credit, he spent hours and months and sometimes years becoming good enough to do some of these things in safer conditions. But still, he did some very risky things. See, I'm a biologist. Crazy doesn't translate to me. I don't know what crazy means. Tell me what crazy means in a way that I can understand. Yeah.
Maybe it's like fear, because usually human beings were fearful by nature.
Why?
We either have fight or flight, and in his case, it seems like, it's more fight than, he's not fearing being that high, walking, across like a piece of string, basically. And he has no fear of that.
Most of us, if we put on a wingsuit and a parachute, even with you, training in planes and most of us wouldn't be able to step on the edge of a cliff and just jump off, right? And I think it's for the very reason you pointed out, right? We've evolved fear, and fear of things that can kill us. And it doesn't make sense when we do things that we should have evolved better sense not to do, right? That's that. So I think that totally makes sense. And there's lots of other things. Now, notice that ultimately, why? Because I'm an evolutionary biologist. It's nice that you're scared of something and weird that this guy is not scared. But ultimately, why would it be weird to not be scared of jumping off a cliff? As an evolutionary biologist, I got a very clear criteria for this. He didn't leave any offspring. Now, until I told you that, there's absolutely no reason why you should be surprised by his behavior. If every woman that Dean Potter ever met wanted to have his baby, I know that sounds ridiculous and I don't mean to make it trivialize women's, well, let's put it this way. No woman chose to have his baby, so there must be something about women's choices and their judgment that prevented him from having offspring. But he left no offspring. Now that might have been his choice, that might have been the choice of his prospective mate that didn't work out. I don't know his life details. But this we know, he didn't leave offspring. Now as an evolutionary biologist, now we're really talking about a behavior that makes no sense. Why would you do something that ends up taking whatever genes you have out of the gene pool? And in fact, he seemed to have really exceptional genes. He was able to master mentally these things, in a way. There are other extreme athletes who do things I see you're wearing an MMA sweatshirt. I'm never going to get into an MMA ring, not just because of my physical stature, which clearly is not MMA ready, but I'm also just, I don't have that mental thing. I mean, even from playing sports, I know I don't have that mental thing to like, to face something that's scary. Right? I've done actually some really wimpy rock climbing with lots of ropes and lots of harnesses. And it's kind of a weird thing. He killed himself with his activities, with his behaviors, and didn't leave offspring as a result. All right? Now, it's very easy to take this and just marginalize this as the other. How many of you rock climb? 0. A little bit, okay, a little bit, okay. How many of you have skydived? 1. Okay, base jumping or skydiving?
Skydiving.
Skydiving, yeah. You have to do a lot of skydiving in order to do some base jumping. How many of you slackline thousands of feet of rope? Okay, let's say no one, right? So it's very easy to marginalize the other here, but let's just face it. If Dean Potter was following his passion, which he clearly was, I mean, he totally dedicated his life to being as good at the things he was, then, are the rest of us ready to fully say that, he's weird and extreme? Because there's a lot of extremists out there. So I would suggest to you that there are extreme academics here, right? People who are so into their academic pursuits, their intellectual life, that they may forego parenting, or may have an offspring. Activists, extreme activists, people who are so into their activist cause that they may completely dedicate their lives to that. Extreme artists, people who want to be in the studio all the time and don't want the distraction of family life from their true creative passions that they have. And I don't know, extreme selfie takers, there seem to be a lot of people out there spending a lot of time publishing, propagating the idea of what their life's about, maybe what they have for dinner, right? So this is kind of an interesting thing that a lot of us do this. And now that's kind of anecdotal. It's like, okay, I can show you an artist, and you can imagine in your head an artist who doesn't have kids because she wants to paint all the time, whatever. But let's look at. One of the things I want to do is look at some statistics and sort of understand is this story actually have a real pattern behind it? And it certainly does. So there's lots of data out there on the population of the world and what we do. And it's kind of an interesting thing. 83 countries had below replacement fertility during the 2010-2015 interval, and 25 of those, the fertility was below 1.5 children per woman. By the way, anyone have a sense of how many children per woman would be replacement? What does this mean, replacement fertility? Yeah? 2. It actually turned out to be 2.1, and the reason it's 2.1 is that there is some mortality of children. Right? And so, but think about it, and we by the way, we count this in women because obviously it's a lot easier, and this is true for all organisms that humans study, particularly mammals. It's a lot easier to know how many offspring a woman has versus a man, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, per couple, you can think of it that way. You don't have to. A woman could have babies with lots of different people. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that 1.5 children per woman is not going to replace the population. Right? That's the average. Right? So that's kind of extreme. I would say that if these populations of people here, and here's some examples, and they're interesting. They run the gamut. So certainly there's not a geographical area where fertility is particularly low, and it's the only place. So you see Central Asian, European, East Asian, Middle Eastern, South American, United States and Canada. I didn't put up here, but we're similar to these ones. But so there's no general pattern of what's going here, except for anyone see a possible pattern here in these countries? Or which countries are not here and what that might... Because it's not true that every country in the entire world is below replacement. Otherwise, our population would be at least on its way to shrinking, and it is continuing to grow. Now, let's just take Cuba as an island here. It's actually a pretty isolated island. If I'm a biologist and I'm a conservation biologist, I would worry that Cubans have an inviable population. They're about ready to go extinct. Why? What happens to a population, any biological population, where there's less than 2 offspring per female? They start to shrink. They start to go down. And so basically, all these populations here are shrinking. Can anyone point out the grand fallacy of me pointing to Cuba or any of these and treating them like pandas or tigers? And it's not that I'm equating humans with animals, because I'm perfectly happy to do that. But equating Cubans with tigers or pandas is totally problematic because Because we're all one species, right? I mean, there's not anything distinctly. First of all, human is probably as much a cultural as anything biological, probably more cultural of an identity. And these are not isolated populations. Even Cuba is not isolated. Right? People are coming and going from Cuba. And so these are just examples of countries where it's kind of, there's a low replacement. Look at Singapore. There's not even one child on average per woman. That's pretty fascinating. So I'm kind of interested in thinking about why this might be. So in order to think about this, what I've kind of done is think about a framework why we can maybe understand this behavior. And to do that, I'm going to talk about 3 different sort of significant reproductive behaviors that humans do. And I call them reproductive behaviors because essentially, to me, they're all reproduction, but then to us, reproduction means something special, maybe biological reproduction, and they're all productive in the sense that we produce things through our behaviors. One I'm calling breeding, and I'll explain that. One I'm calling propagating, and I'll explain that. And one I'm calling creating. And throughout the talk, I'll use these 3 little signifiers here with colors that look kind of like subway lines that you never saw before, B, P, and C, to represent breeding, propagating, and creating. So let's start with breeding. Let me first say, let me just define what I mean by breeding. It's very simple. It's passing on your genes. So the assumption here is that the children being held here are all the biological children of the people who are holding them. I've intentionally chosen this word breeder. Has anyone heard this word breeder before? It's kind of an interesting word. No. So I can't offend you, right? Because you don't even know the word. Yeah, you heard it before?
I heard it was like dog breeder.
Dog breeder. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm off to a bad start. I mean, people, again, I'm a biologist, humans and animals being kind of in the same sphere, that's cool with me, but other people not so cool. No, because it's an epithet. I'm choosing to try to reclaim the epithet, but it is an epithet. Yeah.
I've heard it as a slur against heterosexuals.
Yeah, right. So there's 2 major communities that have used this, and like I said, there's this ongoing debate. One is the part of the queer community. I mean, it's certainly not used by all the queer communities. Certainly there are members of the queer community who are breeders, but part of the queer community who feels that they are being kind of judged by their choice not to have children. And then similarly, heterosexual couples or heterosexual single people who have chosen not to have children. So I must confess I'm a breeder. I have 3 children. But I'm kind of sympathetic to use the word because this idea that society expects you to have children and that is like a normative thing, I think that's a pretty strong thing, and I think the people who don't follow that norm often encounter a lot of cultural resistance to that. So I'm sympathetic to the use of that, so I want to bring out that tension. And then the other part of it is that I actually do think that we are starting to treat people who have children and maybe are children in general in a way that is kind of like we're using a slur. Right? So I'll expand on it a little bit more, but it's a very intentional choice. Now, if you think it's the dumbest thing in the world, I want to know that before that becomes the title of my book, but that's my choice and has a rationale there. So let's talk about breeding here. All right, so there's that guy and this guy. If you know your biology, it's pretty straightforward. The name of the game in evolutionary biology is to pass on your genes. So if this guy on the left here manages to pass on his genes to 3 children, and this guy, especially if those children end up being biological parents themselves, breeders themselves, and are able to pass on their genes, then we call that success. If you fail to pass on your genes, then we call it failure. Now, I want to just start off by pointing out that these words, success and failure, they are normative, right? They have a value to them, right? Like if I said you're a failure, that is not a good thing. But so maybe we should try and find some more neutral words for this, but it's really hard to do so. And I mean it very narrowly in the evolutionary sense. Evolution really rewards only one thing from a biological perspective, and that is passing on genes. Right? The joke is, or the saying is, survival never goes out of style. Right? And in biological terms, your body is not going to survive forever. The only way to truly survive forever, maybe even not possible in a real way as an individual, is to pass on your genes. There's lots of reasons why different individuals might not pass on the genes at the same rate. So survival is one possibility, ability to find a mate is another, and parental ability to raise your children and get them to the point of surviving themselves as parents is another possibility as well. All right? So that's how I'm defining breeding and breeders. Breeding is not the same as parenting, and that's one of the reasons. And people say, well, why don't you call these people parents? It seems like a much more human word. Well, it's a very good reason for it. Can anyone see why I can't call breeders parents and parents breeders? It is feasible to be a breeder but not a parent. It's also feasible to be a parent but not a breeder. Right? You can adopt a child and do all the parenting, right? And you could have a child and not doing the parenting, you could do both, right? I mean, but these are all possible configurations. So I wanted to differentiate that. It turns out that differentiation is really important. So how do we conceptualize parenting? I would say that parenting is about two things. One is assuring the health and welfare of these dependent children, their biological survival, whether they're your actual related children or not. And the other is about teaching these children skills and values, passing on your culture, right? So what's interesting is parents do both of these activities. They're potentially passing on their genes, and they're at least contributing to the biological survival of their offspring, and they are definitely passing on their culture. So what is this culture thing? What are we talking about when we talk about culture? And this is important because there's lots of different versions of culture, and maybe when you're head, I encourage you to think about what's your model for culture, and then what am I saying, and are they harmonious? Is there something different about what I'm saying? So let me tell you what I'm saying when I think about culture. So let's imagine there's this guy over here, and he is behaving, right, in some way. And we evolutionary biologists are obsessed with behaviors. So we talked a bit about Dean Potter and what he felt inside, but what really matters is what he did, right? Because it wasn't the feeling of like, oh, I want to step out onto this line thousands of feet across the, a valley or jump off a cliff that got him into trouble. It was doing it, acting on that feeling, right? And so behaviors are really the name of the game. And in culture, what happens with behaviors is that behaviors have in them implied ideas, right? So we see someone behaving, and we're so good at this we don't even know we're doing it. We see someone behaving, we are able to take a theory of mind and we think about what are they actually doing, what's their intention behind this, what are they trying to accomplish, and we also calculate consciously or subconsciously whether or not it's something we should do too. If we successfully transfer our cultural ideas, this gullible guy over here, then what should happen is that the behavior should be replicated because of this transfer of cultural ideas. This is what I mean by culture, and it's not the only definition of culture, so be aware of that. But if you're going to take an evolutionary approach to culture, then it's really important to think behavior is sort of the phenotype affected by cultural ideas. So genes have an influence on your phenotype of both behavior and your physical body, and then culture can influence your brain, the phenotype you have behaviorally. Culture can't really change your bodily configuration, right? Even if you decide to massively modify your body, it was because an idea went in your head, you performed behavior, and now your phenotype is different. And by the way, any modifications you make yourself, I'm sorry, but it won't be passable on to your offspring, right? Although with genetic stuff going on now, that may not be true in a while. All right, so this is what we call imitation, and observant folks will notice that language is important because what language allows you to do is to transfer cultural ideas without direct imitation. When I came here, the guy who let me in, the security guy, he did kind of halvesies with me. He had me imitate him for half the way. He's like, follow me. So I followed him down the hallway. And then the other half, he used language. He said, right, go that way, go left, and go to the elevator. So I didn't have to actually imitate everything he did in order to behave properly to get to this room by the elevator. He used language to try and translate this to me. So language is really valuable because it's allowed us to go beyond having to see something performed. We can describe it. Now, sometimes it's a lot easier to have someone show you how they do it than it is actually describe it, but language has this potential to get rid of imitation. It's a direct kind of thing. So that's what I mean by propagation. I mean transferring culture from one individual to another such that you change their behavior. This is part of an animal continuum. So lots of animals are able to learn from their environment. So the environment gives them information. Their brains are able to process that information. They change their behavior in response to that. And if they're good at that, they do so in a way that allows them to better survive in their environment. Now, some animals, mostly primates, although there are some great examples of crows doing this. I just watched a video the other day of a crow fishing with a French fry. It found a French fry, put it in the water, waited by the water. When the fish came to grab the French fry, it grabbed the fish. Crows, when we kill ourselves all by being unsustainable, the crows are poised to take over. So mostly primates, though, the animals are able to innovate. Now, to imitate. Now, imitating the innovations of others is really valuable because this kind of trial and error learning with your environment is very costly. It takes a lot of time, it could be risky. Whereas if I see some other individual doing something that's really smart and they figured it out and I don't have to figure it out myself, then better for me, right? Now humans take this to the nth degree, and it is a matter of degree, but we've taken it so far that it's almost like laughable, the culture of other animals. There are cultures of other animals, but ours is so elaborated that it's like sometimes people have a hard time even calling the culture of chimps or the culture of crows or the culture of various different kinds of monkeys culture. because we just build all sorts of things on top of it. So the bike is one of my favorite examples of this. Somebody came up with a basic idea for a bike after some trial and error, and lots of different people. 2 wheels, some sort of steering, some sort of brake, some sort of gearing. And the bike has been massively modified by humans, not building bikes from whole cloth and starting anew, but taking the original idea and modifying it. This is what we call cumulative culture. And the idea of cumulative culture is that humans kind of build on these innovations of others. And cumulative culture has served us super well. So this is a stone tool for 3 million years of our ancestors' history. Pretty much when you dig them up, they all look like this. They were very useful. We think they would be used for butchering animals. Probably not for killing animals because they're kind of too crude. But we're talking about 3 million years of our ancestors and our cousin species. And Professor Tague has a book coming out on evolution and human culture that actually goes through some of this background. But we had all these sister species, and they and our ancestors made these crude stone tools. But when you get closer to us and you get to modern humans, which suddenly when you get to the Upper Paleolithic here, 40,000 years to 10,000 years ago, now you're talking about us, all right? And the tools get much more sophisticated, and I've just chosen some random one that I thought looked kind of cool. This is a fishing, some sort of fishing hook here with barbs, and you can see it's quite intricate. And so the power of cumulative culture is that if you're just imitating all the time, you end up with the same thing all the time and it doesn't change, right? But if you're able to accumulate innovations over generations, person to person, you can really push the technology of your culture, push it to new levels. So it's believed that this is what allowed humans to accelerate and continue to accelerate. So this helps us to understand why culture might go non-linear, kind of very slow at first, and wham, culture kind of explodes as more and more innovations build up on top of each other. And we can also think of culture evolving too, and that's one of the foundational assumptions of my argument is that culture is an evolving system alongside our biology. Not everyone agrees with that, so do your homework if you're curious. The idea here is that each individual is trying to pass on their cultural ideas. There's some pool of individuals. Now, these don't need to be our offspring. They could just be peers that we're trying to pass on our ideas. And the question is, who behaves in a way that's congruent with the ideas that were passed on by other individuals? So in this case, we could say that being higher there on the top is successful if he's able to influence these other folks here to replicate his behaviors. And if this boring guy just wants to talk about books and science all the time, and these folks have no interest in that, and they don't replicate his behaviors, then obviously he's a failure, right? So again, these are normative words, but in biology they mean something very clear. Failure and successful in the sense of this guy passed on his culture, this guy didn't. This guy's culture's gone locally extinct, at least in this little example, right? And there's lots of reasons why some people might pass on their culture better than others. One might just be that they have more social connections, right? So the internet has made that very interesting now. Prestige, right? One person might be highly more prestigious. In this case, I think that might be the case. Could be the popularity, like maybe someone chooses the ideas that more people are doing. So that's not captured in this picture, but if lots of people have this idea, this jerk over here only has one idea, this gentleman with one idea, then people might copy the popular idea. Or it just actually might be the perceived value of the idea. People are judging the value of the ideas and they may perceive one idea as more valuable as something you want to copy than others. Now, when you think about culture, you probably think a lot about material culture. And if you've taken any anthropology courses, that's one of the major bases of archaeological courses, right? Because what's left over is the materials that people left behind. And what I want to make an argument about material culture is that we shouldn't think of material culture in the same way that I've discussed culture. So again, let's think about this guy over here, and let's imagine that he is very smart about hammer making. So he has the cultural ideas that can lead to the behaviors that make a hammer. And hammers are not that, especially a hammer of that sophistication, is not that easy to make. In fact, if you wanted to make a tool, and that's what I'm going to call this. This is a piece of material culture, but I'm going to call it a tool, not a cultural idea like the other things I've been talking about. It's a product of the culture, but it's not culture itself, and I'm going to explain why I'm arguing that. You look at this guy over here, he's very naive, he wants to figure out how to make this. But looking at the hammer itself, you don't know how to make it. Now, if you already knew how to find the right kind of wood, and shape wood, and do the metallurgy involved in making the hammerhead, maybe given the shape of a hammer, you might be able to get some of its design from it, but certainly a hammer does not contain the instructions for making a hammer, right? And so that fundamentally makes it different from cultural ideas, which should be compelling behaviors. Now, can anyone think of any kind of material culture that actually would give you the instructions to do something? Look at objects, something you can hold in your hand. Because material culture is really cool. It's going to be there long after we are. Anything outside of our behaviors, but that contains instructions on how to behave. So it would be a very specific kind of tool, right? So you don't mean a fire hose or a phone, because those things share the same characteristics as a hammer, right? You don't know how to make a phone because you have a phone in your hand, right?
The instruction manual.
Aha! A book, right? Okay, so imagine this guy takes his cultural ideas and puts them into a book, aptly named How to Make Hammers. And so now the book contains the instructions for making a hammer, and this guy on the left here is clever enough to write in a way that I can understand as the recipient, then the cultural ideas are from this media. So media is kind of a special category of material culture. It actually does contain instructions on how to behave, and you can think about now all the kinds of media you consume. I'm very open and broad when I talk about media. A video could tell you how to do something. I was very much into skateboarding when I was younger, and we would wait for those skateboarding videos to come out so you could imitate what the skateboarder was doing. Didn't matter if the skateboarder was still alive or not. If it was recorded on video, I could watch what that person was doing and then try. So I would suggest to you that media is a kind of very special kind of remote culture, and it's remote in time and space. You don't need to be in the same place as the person who created it, and the person doesn't even need to be in the same time period. They don't even need to be alive for you to receive culture from. So cultural ideas can be transferred, and if it works, then it should motivate behaviors that allow this naive recipient to have the cultural ideas that lead to behaviors that make a hammer. And so we should notice here is that media is still having an impact in behavior, and that's kind of a critical thing. Culture can be mutualistic or parasitic. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain that, but these are biological terms. So one idea that might be out there is use antibiotics for infection. And this cultural idea could be passed on to someone. In fact, it was to me when I was a little older than you all. I had a really nasty infection, and if I hadn't taken antibiotics, it probably would have killed me. So I'm very thankful for the cultural idea of antibiotic use and for the tool that those ideas produced. And that allows you, of course, to potentially survive and pass on your genes. Whereas other ideas can be parasitic. Go, jump off of a cliff with a wingsuit on. It's not necessarily an idea that is going to lead to survival. Although, as I said, it really depends on whether or not you can make offspring. If you can make lots of offspring because people find this to be very appealing behavior, then it could still work out. So the top one we would say is mutualistic, in the sense that what's good for the genes and spreading the culture is good for the genes. Here, spreading the cultural idea is bad for genes, and that's particularly the area that I'm interested in. The other last thing I'll tell you about cultural propagation is that it can be both vertical and horizontal. Last time you have to look at that ugly guy. Remember that he has genes and he passed them on to offspring. Potentially, he also could pass on his culture, right? So he could pass on his culture to his offspring, and you all are past the adolescent age where the idea that you're somehow got ideas from your parents is repulsive, but you are just exiting, most of you, that time period. So you have this interesting time period you just experienced where you emerge from your parental home and the ideas of that home, and you also have taken on lots of your own. So you know very well then that not everything that you got was from your parents culturally. There are peers, celebrities, media out there that can influence you, and it's quite feasible that someone could infect, if I want to call it that way, offspring of someone else with their culture, and if the offspring end up behaving, so this first child here becomes a solo free climber, this one starts highlining, and then this one becomes a wingsuit base jumper, then one could easily say then that this guy appears a failure culturally. He didn't pass on his culture to his offspring because he was kind of this guy jumped in and was successful, right? So this is what we call horizontal transfer of culture. And what this means is something very interesting, which is that it's possible to be culturally successful without having offspring, right? The only way a parent can make sure that their kids have the culture they have, don't let them have friends, don't let them read books, go on the internet, watch movies, no exposure to any kind of media, right? And no exposure to anyone else's culture. we laugh, right? But there are cultures that try to do something similar to that. Even in Brooklyn, you see there are cultures that try to insulate, obviously not perfectly, but try to insulate themselves culturally so that most of the culture comes vertically from elders to offspring. But that's not a given of cultural evolution. And by now you're probably thinking, wow, there's no better place for propagating cultural ideas than the internet. It's a major horizontal propagation engine. Basically, when you go on the internet, you're soaking up ideas from people, and maybe some of them will compel you to behave. I guess retweet is a behavior, right? I mean, or like is a behavior in a sense. I think I'm more interested in more profound behaviors, like what's reflected in your sort of behaviors and values. But I guess any kind of behavior that you're compelled to do from being on the internet there. All right, so remember the third one here is called creating. And you might think about creation like kind of traditional creation things like I teach architects, sculptors. I don't have any musicians, but music is certainly creative. You can think about historians potentially being creative, coming up with new interpretations of history and ideas. Certainly science can be very creative in creating new ideas about how the world works. And a lot of the creation of our current era is created by programmers who create new tools through the ideas they have about how to program things. And so what makes these creative and what do we think? What makes these actually creative? Why distinguish between what these folks are doing and what I just called propagating? Like, this guy's probably propagating a lot of musical ideas. This guy didn't make up every idea here about his sculpture. He's propagating existing ideas about sculpture. Science is certainly built on previous discoveries, and a lot of what's being done in the science lab is just propagating what was already done in previous science labs. So what makes creation different? And why do we call these creative fields? I mean, these don't cover all the possible fields that we'll create again.
Try something new.
Yeah, make something new. Basically, like goal for some people. I mean, so we even have a name, right? We have a name for people we think don't make art that is not, that brings something new. We call it derivative, and it is kind of a derisive term, right? Derivative art brings nothing new to the field, right? So there's bands that are derivative, but a truly creative band will bring a new sound, a new idea, a new lyrical convention. And you actually live in a really interesting time where music is evolving very rapidly and lots of new ideas are being inserted culturally. So that's what I mean by creating. So it's adding these novel ideas to existing culture. And what makes it different from mutation, so it's like kind of like mutation in the sense that mutation creates new novelty in biological systems. It's kind of like mutation, but it's a little different because it's intentional. So this is Alexander Graham Bell. He created this drawing here of what would become the telephone. He didn't just randomly draw something and be like, hey, I'll make it and see if it does anything. He intended to make a device for transmitting information, and in doing so, discovered new ideas that will allow eventually the telecommunications we do now. Variation, when people create new things, they create new variation. That creates competition between different types of ideas about how to make a phone, and that creates competition. There are phones that no longer exist. There used to be a Windows phone system that is now dying, right? So Android and the iOS operating systems seem to be dominating now, so there's kind of that variation allows for change. And the fact that we've actually been able to make such rapid changes in our phones has to do with all this new variation that we're constantly generating. So now, my idea here is that humans face a trade-off. And so as a biologist, I'm always thinking about limited resources because that's fundamentally what organisms have to contend with. And for humans, it's time to work, time to do other things. Materials and social connections are a major resource for humans as well. And what I'm sort of thinking about is like, you can spend your time doing any of these things. Now, you might do this kind of in a sort of pure idea, but that seems pretty unlikely for almost all of these. Now, I guess you could be a pure propagator. Like spend 100% of your resources here propagating ideas. Right? Never come up with a new idea, never make offspring, just always propagating. Right? That's possible. It seems really unlikely that you could only create, it's like so hard to create something new without also propagating existing ideas. Right? And it seems really impossible to be solely a breeder. Right? Because just by having offspring and trying to raise them, you're propagating cultural ideas. Maybe you can come up with some scenario where that would be the case. I don't think it actually exists. So what's more likely is we do kind of mixed strategies. And so everyone is taking the resources that they have and splitting them up in different ways. And I think this one's probably pretty unlikely. That one's probably pretty unlikely. These ones here seem pretty likely to me. That one's probably pretty unlikely. But that one probably is a lot of people who don't have offspring, right? A few creative things that they do that make the adding to the culture, a lot of propagation of culture. People who actually have biological offspring probably do a lot of this, to varying degrees here. But the point is that there's this sort of trade-off that people face, and I'm kind of interested in whether or not that trade-off means something for where humans are going and where we've been. So I'll present you a totally ridiculous and unstable configuration that I hopefully will pick apart for me in a minute. But imagine that there's just 3 genotypes in the whole human population. One called B, that makes you mostly a breeder and partly a propagator. One called P, that makes you mostly a propagator, but you might have offspring or do some creative stuff. And one called C, which makes you mostly creative with some propagation. In a second, we'll dissect why this is a totally ridiculous convention, but it's a thought experiment. Why would this be unstable? Because that's a serious problem we definitely face, right? We definitely face the possibility that humans will exhaust all of our resources, right? Now, I'm going to suggest to you, this is going to become a much... Go ahead, you suggest it.
In the future generation, there would be a lot of genotype B and genotype P, but no genotype C.
Yeah, right. I mean, so in this scenario, this is it. Now, this is totally ridiculous because, of course, genetics couldn't be this simple. They're not. They're definitely not. I mean, every characteristic we have that's interesting, and that's a little bit of my normative idea of what's interesting, but behaviors are coded by dozens of genes, right? So there's no gene for any behavior, right? There's dozens and dozens of genes that in combination produce behaviors, and they do so in interaction with the environment. So of course the environment has a big role to play too. Culture, hopefully you're seeing, is part of that environment and can reconfigure our behavior. But I also hope that I can convince you, listen, if you think that no behavior that humans have has anything to do with our genes, then you can just blow off everything I have to say, right? Because it doesn't matter, right? If culture dominates everything, it doesn't matter. But if genes have some influence, then it's kind of an interesting question. Like, if some people are more likely to produce offspring and some people are less, and some people are more likely to be creative or to propagate ideas, what does that mean for culture? So that's sort of what I'm interested in. And what does it mean for humans, really, not for culture? So I'm trying to get some data on this, and you're going to see kind of early information on this, but I'm sort of confronting patterns and trying to find patterns, and I'll show you some of those patterns now. First one is just who's breeding. So this is a really great site that's a lot of fun to play with. It's called Gapminder, so gapminder.org. And you can play with all kinds of things here about global data. This one I'm showing you here, income per person, a possible metric of resources, not the only one, right? And fertility. If that was for birds and non-humans, if this was a field biologist who went out and studied birds, and the field biologist found that the birds with the most resources had the lowest number of offspring, and the birds with the least number of resources had the largest amount of offspring, somebody would be checking the data. This is super weird, right? This is very weird behavior. Why wouldn't you translate your resources into more offspring? So this has a name here, by the way, there's replacement fertility. And you can see lots and lots of countries are below replacement fertility. Again, if you're curious about details, you can probably guess some of these countries here. That's India, that's China, that's the United States. But you can, this tool is really awesome for looking at these things. This is what's called the demographic economic paradox. And basically it is, we're the only species that doesn't turn economic success into breeding success. Right? That's very strange. Right? And if you look at the patterns here, you can see that continentally, there's very large differences in birth rates. Right? So Africa has very high birth rates, although they're declining. Asia and Latin America, North America, Europe, lower. These ones are not that hard to explain. In fact, a lot of evolutionary biologists have tackled this question. Actually makes a lot of sense in the environments that people face in Africa, again, on average, we're talking about a whole continent, to have more offspring because the survival rate of offspring is lower. Those economies rely more on child labor. And so there's actually total evolutionary reason why it would make sense to have more offspring in places that have higher fertility. This makes no sense. Why would it be the case that large regions would have below replacement fertility? So that's kind of the challenge. And this is kind of, in a way, good news, depending on what your goals are. But for me, one of my goals is to have a sustainable society. And part of that certainly is creating eventually a stable population size. We can't grow forever. And what's happening is this demographic transition is happening to all regions, regardless of where they are. Some are making this transition a little more slowly than others. Actually, the rate is not different, just the starting place is different for different continents. But Europe is already below replacement. North America, Latin America and Asia are headed there soon. And we're going to be at a point where replacement, which by the way, replacement here is 0 because that means 0 growth of the human population. So it's a little bit different than the number I've been using. But we're going to be reaching this point where we're going to be stabilizing. So in a way, this cultural conundrum is really good for the sustainability of our society. So I'm kind of not interested in those effects, the continental effects. Because knowing that people in Africa have more offspring than people in Europe or South America doesn't really mean anything to me. And that's because I understand human evolution. And what human evolution and our genetic understanding of human evolution suggests is that most of the variation within humans is within population, not between. Right? So if you're European ancestry, you probably have less genetic variation in the population you came from than if your ancestors are from Africa. But that doesn't mean anything for you personally, necessarily, and it certainly doesn't mean that, like, I can say that if people from a particular continent have more offspring, that's going to cause us to evolve. In fact, if it's just random who in Africa has offspring, and it's random who in Asia has offspring, and it's random who in South America has offspring, then I would predict that no significant change in the human population is going to happen because most of those populations are very genetically similar. Now that may throw some of you off because we're very aware of the genetic differences that are there. Like skin color is a good example, right? Skin color is something that's evolved because of regional adaptation. It's true, the skin color of the population of humans is going to probably change in the future. If you haven't seen that coming, that shouldn't surprise you. But does that really mean anything biologically in terms of our behavior? I would suggest there's no evidence to suggest that that's going to happen. Right? What I'm more interested in is within population variation. So take any one of these populations, is there any variation in who is actually reproducing? And so I'm starting to get some data on this. It's like not that easy to do. You need twin studies to do it, right? Because you need to be able to differentiate between the environment and the genes. And so this is done with twin studies. I can't get into the details of it, but interesting study that was done with a long data set that went from 1870 to 1963 of Danish twins. And what they looked at is if I'm a Danish twin, if I have a fraternal twin, am I less likely to have the same pattern of paternity or maternity or my fertility pattern as someone who has a monozygotic twin, an identical twin, right? And what they find is that identical twins, when fertility goes down, have a lot more offspring. So there's evidence, and this is the tough challenge for anyone who says that genetics don't matter. Twin studies show that genetics do have an impact on some behaviors, in this case fertility. So some evidence that fertility behavior might be within a population affected. What that means in Denmark for this period of time, I have no idea. And whether it means something significant for things we care about, I have no idea. It just shows that it's not random who's having a higher fertility. Right? So hereditary fertility does increase overall. So other things I try to look at that don't really help me very much. In the United States, there's this kind of interesting pattern. Pew Research Center is a great place to look for data on this kind of stuff. So it used to be that educational attainment was predictive of your fertility. It's becoming less so the case. But again, you have to believe that there's like a direct genetic correlation between educational attainment and in your genetics, and I don't know that there's any evidence that that's the case. So that's not a pattern we can work with. Similarly here, there's data on people from different cultural groups. I call these cultural groups because, black, white, Hispanic, I know they have biological meaning to some people, but they really are cultural categories, right? They have some loose connection to place of origin, but they're not very reliable as indicators of your actual, ancestry. And so, not that useful here. Kind of for the same reasons, it's similar to the continental data. It's like, there's no sense that this is going to tell me anything about changes in the genes. So I don't really have anything that, other than that hereditary study, to grab onto, and I'm continuing to look for. Is there any trend here in the way that who's having offspring, and whether or not some people are more subject to giving up their making babies? Right? So what about cultural fitness and who's propagating? This actually gets even harder to determine and look at here. So remember our situation here, we have this guy here, he's behaving, he's transferring cultural ideas. This guy, if you want to measure this, what you'd actually have to do is you have to measure this behavior that's going on, that's transmitting cultural ideas. then you have to measure the behavior that results from it, and then you have to connect them. And so this is like not easy to do, and a lot of people who advocate for a kind of Darwinian approach to cultural evolution have a lot of trouble with this because they, if you can't count cultural fitness, then it's not going to be possible to establish that cultural evolution is going on. So some things I've been looking at here, possible things you to look at are like social connections. That certainly defines your potential for propagation. So looking at social networks is a good start for thinking about who might be doing more propagating than who else. Right? Changing in a certain thing that's been introduced, and you know the origin. So I chose e-cigarettes here. E-cigarettes came out very recently, and so studying the behavior of using e-cigarettes, we might be able to sort of detect where did that come from? Like, who's driving that? Is it young, hip people using them? Is it older people trying to quit smoking? Like, who's driving culturally the adoption of these particular new cultural idea of e-cigarettes versus conventional cigarettes? Also, you might look for patterns of change in behavior, so evidence of sort of a net export of culture from one group to another. And that is actually what I'm going to look at here. So I'll give you an example of something we might want to think about here based on religious beliefs in the United States. So if you look at this, how does religiosity affect fertility? A lot of people have studied this. This is one study here. People who say that religion is very important tend to have more offspring than people who say that it's somewhat important or not important at all. And so religion overall tends to increase fertility as a cultural idea. That would make you think that all other things being equal, we should be becoming more religious, right? But the reality in the United States is quite the opposite. We're becoming less religious over time. And this suggests that what's happening is offspring are being born to religious people, people who hold religious value, and are not carrying on that. In other words, they're being subject to horizontal propagation of cultural ideas from somewhere else, right? And so that suggests that potentially non-religious people are, at least in the United States, more successful at this point in propagating their ideas than people who identify with some religion. Right? It's just one piece of data, take it as what it is, but it's kind of an interesting thing here. Obviously, probably too, that a lot of what we do propagative-wise is related to material consumption. So you could look at something like this, where you look at fertility here as a function of energy use. So you can see people who have more offspring tend to have less energy use, and vice versa there. So there's that kind of trend. But it's just really hard to come up with proxies for propagating. So that's a major problem if you can't look at that who's propagating and count it. Creating is also kind of a problem too. But this is an interesting one. There's this thing called the Martin Prosperity Institute, and they've done this thing called the Global Creativity Index. So I'm using this to look at this question. So it's an interesting index. They take what they call talent, technology, and tolerance. And tolerance is interesting. They basically say that highly creative areas are very tolerant. And they measured it for like 139 countries spanning the globe, and it roughly correlates with other economic measures. So it seems like it does measure something related to technological innovation, which drives a lot of our economy. So what I did is looked at this index here, and I took their index as the Global Creativity Index and looked at fertility, and sure enough, you get this pattern here, where most of the most creative-related, creative output countries are below replacement fertility, and ones that are rated more lowly tend to have, on the creativity index, tend to have higher fertility. It's an interesting trend though, because these countries are not rated as highly creative, and yet they don't have high fertility. So clearly other behaviors are possibly also vying for parenthood or breeding on this one too. But there's also clearly shows you the trade-off. There are no countries that are really rated as having high creative output. They also have very high fertility. So it seems like there is this trade-off in human populations. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to skip a little bit here. I don't want to take you too long. Interesting question here. I'll just show you this one real quickly. Interesting question is, like, as a parent, like, how much if you breed and have a child, and you parent that child, can you pass on, culture? Turns out that there's a lot of people who are saying, and it's not uncontroversial, that culture is mostly horizontal. In other words, most of your culture comes from your peers. This was a study of smoking, very fascinating, another twin study. They found that peers and not parents have a major role in influencing smoking behaviors in adolescents. And genetics didn't have that big an impact, which should surprise you for something that is a physical addiction. Right? And so peers have a big impact there. So I guess what I'm sort of suggesting to you, I think this is probably where I'll leave it off here, is that there's this sort of trade-off, and it'd be interesting for us to sort of think about, in the future, how does this trade-off play out? different activities are using different amounts of resources, right? So people who are breeding are using their resources to make offspring. People who are propagating are using their resources to propagate existing ideas. People who are creating are using their resources to create novel ideas. And, propagators totally need the offspring of breeders, right? Again, they could be one and the same, right? You can be both a propagator and breeder. But there's a dependence of culture on biology here. You need to have living bodies in order to carry on these ideas. Similarly true for new ideas as well. New ideas also can infect propagators, right? So there's an interesting tension here between creators of new ideas and propagators, which might explain a lot of the tension you see in cultures between orthodoxy and novelty. Right? Like orthodox ideas are trying to hold on to a certain set of ideas and propagate those, and new creative ideas are trying to sort of infect those, cross-infect those. So that looks like pretty much like culture is trying to parasitize biology, but it's not so simple. You're probably intuit, because a lot of these cultural ideas produce valuable technologies that allow for increases in survival. In other words, these are adaptive technologies. Much of our culture is adaptive technology. So we are so dependent on ideas and cultural ideas to survive. An experiment that one of my favorite cultural evolutionary biologists uses is, if you wanted one thing, if I drop you in, the North Pole or near the North Pole, what's that one thing you want? What do you want?
Eat.
Heat, okay? So you want a heater, I give you a heater, you can have it. Good luck finding electricity and all that other stuff, you're in trouble. I'll give you a cord of wood if you want it. You're still dead, I'm sure, sorry. I'm going to kill you all off. Anyone else? This is by Robert Boyd is the name of the anthropologist who uses this as a thought experiment, so let me give him credit for this. Yeah?
I would say
Food, okay, good. So when it runs out, you will die. I'm sorry, you're dead. This is called You Name It, I Kill You. Okay. No special tools, warm jacket. The answer is very simple. An Inuit friend. Right? Because that person, and they gotta be a friend, right? If that person has they have the cultural knowledge to tell you the valuable technologies you need to survive. Right? And so we're really dependent on it. And so anyone who thinks that you're a rugged individualist, you just were born into the wrong species. I'm so sorry. You should have been like a leopard or something. You could have been an awesome leopard if you think you're a rugged individualist. You are so dependent on the culture you live in and all the tools it provides you to survive. It's ridiculous. We're all amazingly interdependent. So there's this biocultural paradox, and they're pretty much interdependent. The only thing that's kind of interesting, like I said, is culture. The new creative culture may kind of be exploiting propagators, but not depending. Propagators don't depend on novelty. But I think I'll leave it at that. I had a few more things, but I think I'm going well over time. I'd love to get your questions, ideas, thoughts, so I'll skip to that on there. And thank you for your patience with my somewhat long presentation.